Hi, I'm Twyla Carrington. At my father's funeral, my sister Radley wore diamonds and gave speeches. I stood in the back, holding a one-way ticket he left me in a sealed envelope. She got the mansion, the yacht, the media, and I got silence. But that wasn't the part that broke me. The part that haunts me? They tried to erase me. From his will, from the stories, from the family itself. So I stayed quiet, for 3 months. And then, everything changed. Would you believe a single video could burn down a legacy built on lies? The rain had begun before dawn and hadn't let up since. Portland's West Hills were cloaked in a fine, persistent drizzle that made the mossy stone steps outside the Victorian church gleam like glass. I adjusted my umbrella, though it barely helped. My black wool dress clung to my legs with every step I took up the walkway, heavy with damp and grief. Every part of me resisted entering that building, except my feet. They kept moving. The church loomed in quiet dignity, framed by leafless trees and a cold wind that stung the skin. I'd been here once before, years ago. Easter Sunday, I think. Father wore a pale blue tie. Radley had stolen jelly beans from the offering basket, and somehow, still, everyone had found her adorable. Now she ruled this place like she ruled everything else. Inside, the sanctuary was warm but solemn, lit by soft shafts of light filtering through stained glass windows depicting saints and martyrs. Smoke from incense curled toward the rafters, slow and reverent. There was something oppressive in the hush, like everyone had agreed that mourning required a certain choreography. Clasped hands, hushed voices, pressed handkerchiefs. No one was out of step, except me. I hovered at the back for a moment, unnoticed, unwanted. Then I walked in. My heels tapped lightly on the polished stone, but it felt like thunder in the stillness. People glanced my way with polite, faintly surprised expressions. Some offered tight smiles. A few just looked away. I recognized most of them. Distant relatives, old business associates of father's, neighbors who had once come by with holiday baskets. All of them now gathered to mourn a man they claimed to love. But I didn't feel the warmth of community. I felt like a stain on the linen. "Is that her?" someone whispered behind me. "Yes," another voice replied. "The teacher." "Oh, right. The one who moved out east. She never really fit in, did she?" The words were faint, but deliberate, designed to be overheard without being addressed. I didn't flinch, not outwardly, but something inside me curled into itself. Radley stood near the altar, surrounded by a phalanx of supporters in tailored coats and expensive heels. She wore a fitted black dress with a pearl choker, tasteful, commanding, effortless. Her eyes scanned the room like she owned it. Which soon enough she would. She saw me, nodded once, then turned back to her admirers. No wave, no approach, no sisterly warmth, just cold acknowledgement. That was Radley's way. She played the part of grieving daughter with flawless execution, dabbed eyes, serene smile, shoulders back, but I knew her well enough to see the performance beneath. I took my place in a pew near the back, precisely where I was meant to sit, not with family, not with Radley, just adjacent. Enough to be noticed, but never counted. The organist began to play, slow and somber. The casket was wheeled down the aisle. I felt my lungs tighten. My father lay inside that wooden box. At least, the body of him did. The rest, the warmth, the intelligence, the occasional bursts of unexpected kindness, those had gone long before his heart stopped. The minister spoke of legacy and vision, of a man devoted to his family and his community. He used phrases like pillar of strength and steadfast provider. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor. Every word was like a stone dropped into a hollow well. After the final hymn, a suited man stood and cleared his throat, the family attorney, Mr. Lansing. He held a stack of papers and an envelope that looked oddly out of place, wrinkled, cheap, unceremonious. "Per the last will and testament of Roland H. Carrington," he began, voice echoing through the cathedral, "certain matters of inheritance are to be disclosed." Radley straightened her spine, the room collectively leaning forward. "To Radley Carrington, his daughter and principal heir," he continued, He leaves the family estate on West Hawthorne Drive and the Carrington yacht currently moored in Seattle Harbor. There was a soft ripple of approval. Radley inclined her head with the kind of smile that danced between grief and satisfaction. Then silence, the kind that stings the ears. And to Twyla Carrington, my name felt foreign in his mouth. He leaves this. He held up the envelope and extended it toward me. I hesitated, but my body moved on its own. I rose, took the envelope with fingers that trembled despite my efforts to appear composed. It was light, insultingly so. I opened it and stared at the contents. A one-way plane ticket to Chicago. Coach. No letter, no explanation, no inheritance, just a destination. There was a moment when time seemed to freeze. Then I heard a faint giggle, stifled behind a gloved hand. A few people murmured. Someone coughed awkwardly. Radley leaned slightly in my direction, her voice like silk wrapped around a blade. At least you can get a fresh start, Twyla. My fingers curled around the envelope until it bent. A flush rose up my throat. I felt it bloom across my cheeks, but I wouldn't give them the show they wanted. I wouldn't cry. Not here. I stood slowly, placed the envelope back on the pew, and walked up the aisle. Each step echoed louder than the organ's final notes. My heels struck stone. My jaw clenched. No one stopped me. No one called out, not even Radley. Outside, the drizzle had turned to rain. Cold. Relentless. I stood under the portico, breathing hard. My breath fogged in front of me. I looked out at the cemetery, where they would soon lower the casket. I didn't want to see it. I didn't need to. What I needed was something I hadn't realized until that very moment. I hadn't just been disinherited. I had been erased. Years of quiet estrangement, of being the inconvenient daughter, the second-place sibling, the problem no one wanted to acknowledge. That had led to this. A ticket out and a message between the lines. You are not part of this family. And maybe, just maybe, it was time I stopped trying to be. The rain had started falling harder by the time my heels touched the cracked pavement of the church parking lot. I didn't run. I didn't even pull my coat tighter. The drizzle beaded across my hair, rolling down my collar like cold fingers. The laughter and murmurs from inside the chapel thinned until they became a low hum behind the heavy oak doors. I stopped halfway to my car and turned, as if instinct might give me one last glimpse of something I'd been reaching for all my life. Through the glass doors, I caught sight of my mother. Meredith stood perfectly still for a moment, her gloved hand resting lightly on Radley's arm. Radley's lips moved, probably another polished line about family unity or grieving with grace. My mother's eyes followed Radley as they descended the steps together. She never looked up at me, never searched for me in the gray lot. For a second I thought she might. She adjusted her scarf and shifted her weight. But no, her gaze swept past me as if I were only another wet car parked at the edge of the lot. I let my breath out slowly and slid into my old Honda Civic. The seat creaked. The envelope with the one-way ticket lay on the passenger seat like a cruel joke no one had the decency to explain. My hands were still trembling, but I kept them on the steering wheel, palms flat until the tremor dulled. Across the lot, Radley stepped into the back seat of a sleek black town car, a driver holding the door. Even from this distance, I saw the flash of camera phones, people taking photos of her in her black dress, hair perfectly styled under the rain, a figure of sympathy and elegance. I sat behind my fogged windshield, invisible. I turned the ignition. The Civic coughed, then settled into its tired rumble. The wipers squeaked across the glass. Portland's hills blurred past me as I drove home, streetlights glowing faint in the mist. My fingers tapped the wheel without rhythm. In the back of my mind, a voice kept whispering, maybe I was never meant to belong. Maybe my father had only tolerated me out of obligation, a footnote in a legacy he'd already handed to Radley. Traffic slowed on Burnside as people crowded near coffee shops, umbrellas bobbing. I stared at them from my lane, a swirl of strangers, their lives unfolding, their families perhaps waiting for them. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The ticket shifted slightly on the seat as I braked at a light. Chicago. One way. I hadn't been there since a teaching conference years ago. Why would my father send me there now, posthumously, as if shoving me off stage? By the time I pulled into my apartment's lot, night had crept in fully. The drizzle had turned to a thin, icy rain. I gathered my bag and the envelope, climbed the stairs, and let myself into the quiet. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee grounds and paper, comforting and sterile all at once. I set the envelope on the kitchen table, turned on the lamp, and stood for a while in the dim light, listening to the rain tick against the window. I poured myself a glass of water, sat, and stared at the ticket. Chicago. A date 3 weeks from now. No note, no instruction. Just a flight. My reflection wavered in the glass of water. In the background, my old laptop hummed on the counter, the one my father had given me years ago with a stack of old family footage. I don't know why I reached for it. Maybe I was looking for proof I'd existed, some shred of warmth left untouched by the coldness of the day. I slid onto the couch, balancing the laptop on my knees, and opened the hard drive marked Family. The first video was my 6th birthday. Balloons in the living room, cake with pink frosting. Radley front and center, singing. I clicked play, expecting to see my own small face next to hers. But the footage was wrong. Where I should have been standing, there was a strange blur, a cut in the film, as though someone had removed me with clumsy editing software. Frowning, I opened another file, my high school graduation. There was Dad, proud in his blazer. Radley hugged him, camera zooming close on her smile. The footage panned across the crowd and then, abruptly, turned away before reaching me. I clicked more. Thanksgiving dinners, family trips to Cannon Beach, even a random Sunday breakfast. Every clip featured Radley front and center, my parents flanking her. When the camera passed where I should have been, the frame shifted, blurred, or cut away entirely. It was as though someone had taken a knife to our history and scraped me out. I stared at the screen, my heart thudding against my ribs. My throat felt tight, my stomach hollow. It wasn't just that I'd been ignored today. It was deeper, systematic. Someone had been erasing me for years, maybe decades, making me a ghost in my own family's story. The laptop's glow threw pale light across my hands. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, trembling again, but for a different reason now. Disbelief curdled into nausea, then into something heavier than heartbreak. I sat back and pressed my palms to my eyes. The room stayed silent except for the rain and the faint hum of the hard drive. Tears came, but not loudly. No sobbing, no dramatic cries, just silent streams slipping down my cheeks. You can lose money, I whispered into the dim room. You can lose houses, jobs. But when they erase your existence, what do you have left? My own voice sounded strange, like someone else speaking from far away. I closed the laptop softly. The glow vanished, leaving me in near darkness. The envelope with the one-way ticket still sat on the table, its corner catching a glint from the streetlight outside. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. That night, I realized my family hadn't just abandoned me, they had rewritten our story without me in it. The next morning, pale light seeped through the blinds, pulling me out of a restless sleep. My eyes felt raw and swollen, my throat scratchy from tears I hadn't allowed to make a sound. The apartment smelled faintly of last night's coffee, now cold in the mug by my bed. I sat up slowly, each movement heavy, as though grief had settled into my bones overnight. I shuffled into the kitchen. The one-way ticket still lay on the table where I'd left it, its corner bent from my fingers. It felt like an eviction notice dressed up as a gift. I poured a glass of water, stared at the ticket, and muttered to no one. Maybe they wanted me gone so badly, they couldn't even say it out loud. My voice cracked on the last word. For a while I just sat there, tracing the edge of the paper with my fingertip. My father's face hovered in my mind, his laugh, his habit of tapping the table when thinking. It had been so long since I'd felt seen by him, but he'd still been my anchor, a quiet force. Now he was gone, and all I had was this flight to nowhere. Something tugged at me then. In the back of my closet sat an old wooden chest my father had given me when I left for college. I hadn't opened it in years, maybe since moving to this apartment. I left the kitchen, the ticket still on the table, and went to the bedroom. The chest was dusty but solid, its brass latch dulled. I dragged it into the center of the room and flipped it open. Inside lay fragments of a different life. A folded fishing hat that still smelled faintly of river water. A set of cufflinks shaped like tiny anchors. A pocket watch with his initials etched on the back. Beneath these, a bundle of faded envelopes tied with string. I untied the string and sifted through them. Old bills, postcards from trips he'd taken without us, receipts from hardware stores. And then I saw it. An envelope sealed, my name written across it in his unmistakable handwriting. Twyla. My breath caught. My hands shook as I picked it up. I sat on the floor, legs folded beneath me, and stared at it for a long time. The paper was yellowed but firm. Finally, I tore it open. Inside was a letter dated 3 months before his death. His handwriting sprawled across the page, slower than I remembered, each loop heavy. My dearest Twyla, it began. I have been a coward. I watched as your mother and Radley pushed you aside, and I did nothing. I told myself I'd fix it one day, but days slipped into years. You became the backbone of this family, the one who sacrificed, who kept the peace, and still, I let them erase you. I'm sorry. I swallowed hard, eyes blurring. I want you to know I never forgot you. I never stopped being proud of you. I had plans to make things right. Some of those plans may already be in motion, but I can't promise they'll survive me. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Trust Clint. He knows more than I could write here. I left a truth no one can erase. Please find it. Love, Dad. I pressed the letter to my chest. For a moment, the room tilted, and I had to close my eyes. Pain welled up, but beneath it was something else, like a candle flickering in a dark room. He had seen me. He had tried. A knock startled me. I tucked the letter back into the envelope, wiped my eyes with my sleeve, and went to the door. Through the peephole, I saw a tall man in a worn jacket, gray at the temples, holding a baseball cap in his hands. I opened the door cautiously. Clint? He gave me a small nod. Twyla, can I come in? I stepped aside. He smelled faintly of lake water and cedar, just like my father used to after fishing trips. He looked around the apartment, but didn't comment. I'm sorry about Roland, he said softly, lowering himself into a chair at the kitchen table. He was more than a friend to me. I sat opposite him, letter still in my hand. He mentioned you. In this. I gestured with the envelope. Said you knew something. Clint's jaw tightened. I do, and it's not right what happened to you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. Your father had been working on new documents, changing the will back to what he thought was fair. Weeks before he died, everything shifted. Signatures replaced, pages swapped. I have copies. I flipped open the folder. Inside were scanned documents, some with dates just 2 weeks before the funeral. My father's name had been overwritten in places. Another name appeared repeatedly. Marlowe. My brother-in-law. My stomach clenched. They changed it. Clint nodded. He suspected someone might. He gave me these copies in case something happened to him. Told me, if Twyla's cut out, show her this. I closed the folder and looked at him. Why are you doing this? Because he loved you, Clint said simply. He didn't always show it, but you were his heart. He wanted you to fight back, not disappear. Something inside me shifted then. The despair I'd been drowning in cracked just enough to let air in. I looked down at the letter, at Clint's documents spread before me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. My father had seen me. He had left me something no one could erase. His truth. And with Clint's words echoing in my kitchen, I knew my fight had just begun. The days that followed were soaked in rain and silence. Portland's skies stayed heavy with unrelenting drizzle, casting a gray pall over everything I did. At home, my kitchen table had become a battleground. Clint's documents, my father's letter, bank statements, and old family photos were spread out like evidence in a courtroom. Every night, I hovered over them, coffee growing cold by my elbow, eyes scanning lines of type until they blurred. Returning to school brought little relief. The classrooms felt more like echo chambers than places of learning. I spoke, I taught, I answered questions, but it was all mechanical. Behind the veil of normalcy, I was unraveling a deeper betrayal, one signature at a time. I could still hear my students laughing, the scrape of chairs, the hum of fluorescent lights. But it all seemed so far away, as if I were watching my own life from behind glass. Radley's face, however, was everywhere, inescapable. By Thursday, I couldn't even grab coffee without seeing her. Above the faculty lounge espresso machine, a local news segment played on loop. Radley Colton honors her late father with a new charitable foundation, the anchor announced brightly. And there she was, smiling, radiant in a navy dress, clasping hands with a city council member. Her hair was swept back in soft curls, her lipstick perfect. My father stood beside her in the photo they flashed on screen, but I noticed the careful crop, his shoulder visible, the rest cut out, including me. I pressed the mute button and stared at the screen, jaw tight. Behind me, I could hear two other teachers whispering. "I heard her sister got almost nothing," one said. "Yeah," the other replied. "Apparently they weren't close. Tragic, really." I stood up and left before my face betrayed what I felt. The door clicked shut behind me, harder than necessary. That afternoon, as I drove home through the slick city streets, I passed a billboard. Radley again, this time standing in front of a hospital wing, newly renamed in our father's memory. A bold tagline stretched across the bottom, "Continuing his work." It wasn't just insult anymore, it was full-on erasure. "They're not just leaving me out," I muttered at a red light, my voice tight with fury. "They're rewriting the whole damn story." That night, Clint called. His voice was low, almost a whisper through the static. "We can't talk over the phone. Meet me tomorrow. There's a diner off Burnside, 3 o'clock, back booth." The next day, I arrived early. The diner was dim and smelled faintly of fried onions and damp leather. I chose the farthest booth in the back, facing the door. The rain had already started again. I watched it streak down the windows like tears that wouldn't fall. 10 minutes past 3, Clint walked in. His coat was soaked, his eyes shadowed with urgency. He didn't say hello, just slid into the seat opposite me and placed a heavy folder on the table. Without a word, he opened it. "What you're about to see," he said, voice barely above a murmur, "is what your father feared might happen." Inside were records, dozens, bank statements, amendments, notarized documents, all signed in neat, controlled handwriting. But not my father's. These bore the signature of Marlo Keaton, Radley's husband, the man who always stood in the background at family events, offering polite smiles but never engaging. I'd always thought of him as a shadow. Now I saw him for what he really was, a strategist. The amendments were dated. Every one of them fell within the last month of my father's life, when he was too sick to fight back. One by one, the documents rerouted assets, updated beneficiaries, shifted control. From me to Radley. I felt the weight of betrayal tighten around my chest. "This wasn't an oversight," I said softly. "This was planned." Clint nodded. "Marlo handled the legal logistics. Your sister signed where he told her to. Your dad, he tried to stop it, but he was running out of time." I swallowed hard. "So Marlo's the one pulling the strings." "Exactly." Clint's finger tapped the folder. "And this is enough to expose him. Maybe not in court yet, but it's enough to start tearing down the narrative they're building." I stared at the paper. My hands were trembling slightly, not with fear, but rage. Part of me wanted to storm over to Radley's gated mansion, throw these files onto her kitchen counter, and watch her perfect composure shatter. I wanted to see the guilt, the scramble, the desperate justifications. But I knew that wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't bring my father back. And it wouldn't fix the silence the world had wrapped around my name. Instead, I closed the folder carefully and placed it into my bag. "I'll keep them safe," I said. The rain had picked up by the time I left the diner. I rolled down my window halfway as I drove through the city, letting the cold air sting my cheeks and clear my head. Everything outside was blurred, lights, shadows, shapes, but inside, my mind was sharpening. This was no longer about inheritance. This was about truth. about being seen. Back home, I laid everything out on my desk. Clint's evidence, my father's final letter, even the old family photos where Marlo always stood off to the side, pretending not to care. I turned on the television for background noise, but what I saw made my stomach turn. Radley again, on a local talk show. Perfect lighting, somber music. Her voice shook, just slightly, as she leaned toward the host. "My father always said family meant everything," she whispered. "I was with him. To the very end." I muted it instantly. Her lips kept moving in silence. The absence of sound made her performance all the more chilling. In that moment, something in me hardened. If they wanted me invisible, I said to the empty room, they picked the wrong woman. Then the screen split. On one side, Radley. On the other, Marlo. His hand rested gently on her shoulder. His smile was mild, reassuring, harmless, to anyone who didn't know better. But I did. I looked at his face, calm, composed, dangerous, and I finally understood. This was the man behind the curtain, the puppeteer. And I was done letting him write my ending. I sat alone at my kitchen table, long after the TV had gone dark. Clint's folder lay open in front of me, alongside my father's last letter. Two separate but connected pieces of a puzzle I wished I never had to solve. Every page I'd read, every bank statement, every forged amendment stared back at me like evidence from a courtroom, daring me to do something with them. My hands trembled as I reached for my tea, now cold. I hadn't slept, but I wasn't tired. I was buzzing with a strange energy, grief and fury tangled in a knot that refused to unravel. By Saturday morning, the rain that had blanketed Portland all week had finally eased. The sky was a dull shade of gray, like someone had drained it of emotion. I hadn't told anyone my plans, not even Clint, but I knew what I had to do. It was time to face my mother. Not another unanswered voicemail, not another maybe next week text, not silence. I needed to look her in the eye and ask the question that had been burning in me since the funeral. Did you know? Did you help them erase me? Her house in Lake Oswego hadn't changed since the last time I visited. 3 Christmases ago. Perfect lawn, fresh mulch, a wreath for every season. My beat-up Honda looked like a blemish next to the glossy black SUV in the driveway. Radley's, no doubt. I walked up the front path, the sound of my shoes muffled by the damp concrete. Through the front window, I saw the dining room table set with fine china, silverware glinting in the weak morning light. A vase of lilies sat in the center, Radley's favorite, of course. The door opened after a long pause. My mother stood there, still dressed in her robe, her hair tied back in a loose bun. She looked startled, but not surprised. "Twyla," she said in a voice as flat as the sky. "You should have called." "I figured you wouldn't answer," I replied. She stepped aside wordlessly, and I entered. The familiar scent of lemon polish wrapped around me, pulling me backward through time. The same floral wallpaper, the same grandfather clock that ticked with stubborn defiance. Nothing had changed. Except everything had. We sat at the dining table in silence for a moment. She reached for her mug, still steaming, and sipped, careful not to meet my eyes. I laid the folder on the table between us. "I brought something," I said. She glanced at it briefly, then looked away. "I don't want to get into all that again," she murmured. "It won't bring him back." "This isn't about bringing him back. It's about what he tried to do before he died." "Twyla, these are legal amendments, bank records. Dad tried to change the will. Clint found them. Someone stopped the changes from going through." She reached for a napkin and dabbed at a non-existent stain on the tablecloth. "I'm not interested in your grievances, sweetheart. Radley's been carrying the weight of this family for months now." I could feel the heat rising in my chest. "These aren't grievances, they're facts. Facts that someone deliberately buried." She finally looked at me, her eyes colder than I remembered. "Your father was very ill, confused even." "No," I said, my voice steady. "He knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to make things right. He wanted me to have something, but someone interfered." She sighed, setting her cup down. "Radley was always the one who could handle things. She was reliable. You've always been too emotional." I gave up law school to help take care of Dad, I snapped. I paid the bills when Radley disappeared to Cabo with her boyfriend. You think I'm emotional because I wanted to be seen? Her face twitched at that. Don't twist the past. I'm not. I'm finally telling it the way it really happened. There was a long pause. Then she stood, turning her back to me, and rearranged the lilies as if they mattered more than this conversation. You don't want to hear the truth, I said softly. You never did. She didn't reply. Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. I stood. You've made your choice. Again. Her back stiffened, but she didn't turn around. I walked out of the house, the door closing behind me with a finality I didn't try to resist. Outside, the air was brisk and damp, but it didn't bother me. The cold helped clear the fog in my chest. I didn't cry. Not anymore. I'd cried too many times already. For her, for Radley, for a father who tried, too late, to undo the damage. That evening, I stayed late at school. My classroom was empty, quiet. A soft hum from the old heating system buzzed in the ceiling. On the wall near my desk hung the photo I always came back to. Dad and me, standing together at the State Teaching Awards. His arm was around my shoulder, both of us smiling, no Radley in sight. It was the only moment I had proof he saw me. I stood in front of it, staring. On the corkboard next to it were handmade thank you notes from my students, bright construction paper, glitter glue, stick figures with speech bubbles that said things like, "Best teacher ever," and "Thanks for helping me pass math." They didn't know about my family. They only knew what I showed up to be for them. That mattered. That was mine. A lump formed in my throat. Not from grief, but something quieter, sturdier. Maybe it was peace, or maybe it was purpose. For all I'd lost, I still had this. The ability to make someone else's life better, even if no one had done the same for me. Maybe love was always conditional in our house, I whispered. Maybe I kept asking for something that was never really there. I gathered my things, slipping the stack of graded papers into my bag. Outside, the parking lot lights buzzed like fireflies under the night sky. Before turning off the lights, I looked once more at the photo of Dad and me. I won't let you down, I said. Not now, not again. Locking the door behind me, I stepped out into the night air, inhaling deeply. I wasn't chasing the past anymore. I wasn't fighting for inheritance or status. I was fighting to reclaim the truth of who I was, and that was something no one could take away. The doorbell rang on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was alone, washing the last few dishes from lunch, the kitchen dim with soft golden light slanting through the half-closed blinds. The clink of porcelain stopped as I froze, water dripping from my hands into the sink. I wasn't expecting anyone. With cautious steps, I walked toward the front door, wiping my hands on a towel as I passed through the living room. My heart ticked a little faster, not from fear, but from the unknown. Through the peephole, I saw them. A small local news crew. 2 people with cameras, another holding a boom mic, and a woman with a clipboard, her expression composed and slightly apologetic. I opened the door just a crack. Yes? Ms. Carrington, Twyla, if that's all right, the woman said smoothly. We're with Channel 7 News. We were hoping to get a quick statement. How do you feel about being excluded from your late father's will? There it was. The question everyone must have been waiting for. The camera's red light blinked, waiting for me to react, maybe with tears, rage, or even a carefully prepared PR answer. I did none of those things. Instead, I kept my tone even, my face calm. I'm sorry, I said. I have nothing to say. And I shut the door. No drama, no further explanation. Just silence. Later that evening, as I was grading spelling tests on the couch with a cup of tea in hand, my phone lit up with a flurry of notifications. News apps, gossip blogs, and local Twitter chatter all pulsed with the same message. Radley Carrington's sister declines comment on inheritance scandal. One article even called me the quiet sister, as if my refusal to speak had become a character trait worthy of headlines. The world wanted a show. They expected me to fight, to plead, to lash out, but I gave them none of it. And somehow, that felt like the most powerful response I could ever offer. The next morning at school, I walked through the front doors with my shoulders squared. My cardigan clung to the scent of home, and my hair was pulled back, not perfectly, but neatly enough to show I was holding myself together. A few teachers glanced at me a bit too long, as if waiting for signs of breakdown or bitterness. I gave them nothing. In my classroom, I greeted my students with a smile that didn't waver. Some were still rubbing sleep from their eyes, while others had already begun whispering about lunchboxes and recess plans. I immersed myself in their little world, one where math problems and book reports still mattered. During my break, a parent caught me in the hallway. Her son, Jackson, had been struggling with reading. "Ms. Carrington," she said, her voice low and sincere, "I saw what you did for Jackson last week. Staying after class, working with him like that, it made a real difference. He came home excited to read. I want to thank you." Her words reached a part of me that the cameras couldn't. Praise from a stranger meant more than any spotlight ever could. I tucked the compliment away, gently, like a letter I didn't want to lose. It reminded me that legacy isn't measured in money or yachts or houses. It's measured in moments, in impact. That afternoon, the same reporter from the TV station called again. This time it was a polite offer. "We're running a piece on family legacies and inheritance stories. We'd love to give you the chance to share your side. Exclusively, of course. You deserve to be heard." My fingers hesitated over the speaker button. I imagined Radley watching the segment if I said yes, smirking somewhere in a custom-tailored suit, congratulating himself on the chaos he'd sown. He'd get exactly what he wanted. Me, pulled into his stage play of power and ego. But then I thought about silence. About how sometimes saying nothing at all forces others to confront the void. In that quiet, they begin to hear their own thoughts, their own guilt. Silence unsettles. It makes people squirm. It also gives you control. I declined the offer, politely, but firmly. "Thank you, but I won't be giving any interviews. I'm not interested in playing that game." There was a beat of silence on their end. Then a clipped, "Understood." I hung up and walked to the window at the back of my classroom. Outside, the world carried on. Buses pulled into the school lot, leaves trembled in the breeze, and raindrops began to scatter across the pavement. Autumn was digging in deep. From that window, the sky looked heavy with secrets. But I didn't feel burdened. I felt still, steady. That night, in the quiet of my bathroom, I stood before the mirror. The light was soft, casting a pale halo over the room. My reflection stared back with tired, honest eyes. I wasn't glamorous or polished, but I looked present, whole. I studied the line of my jaw, the small creases forming near my mouth, etched not by bitterness but by strength hard-earned. For years, Radley had dominated the narrative of our family. He'd spoken over others, drowned out their doubts with bravado and wealth. But now, in this strange new chapter, I had found power in restraint. They think silence is surrender. That stillness means you have nothing left to fight for. But they're wrong. Silence is where I gather my strength. It's where I make room for my own voice, not shouted, not performed, but true. Quietly, I am rebuilding. Not with noise, but with purpose. And that, I'm learning, speaks louder than anything else. Strength. That's what I saw in my reflection that night. Not the kind that earns applause or headlines. No, it was the quiet kind. The kind that grows in silence, forged in isolation. It lived in the way I woke up each morning, went to work, smiled when I had to, and said nothing when it would have been easier to scream. It wasn't glamorous. It was survival. But that strength, it would be tested the very next day. I came home from work, tired and gritty from the October wind. The leaves had started to gather like secrets on the porch steps. As I unlocked my front door, Helen, my nosy neighbor from 2 doors down, leaned over the fence, grinning like she'd won a prize. "Twyla, did you hear?" she chirped. "Your sister's going to be on national television tonight. They're doing a whole segment on your father's passing, something about honoring his legacy. Isn't that wonderful?" I smiled with the kind of politeness I had perfected over the years. "Wow." No, I hadn't heard. Helen beamed like she was breaking a royal announcement. It's on Channel 6 at 8. You must be so proud of her. I nodded, though my stomach had already begun to twist. Inside, I tried to ignore it. I made tea. I did laundry. I lit a candle and sat with a book in my lap. But the words on the page swam, blurring into nothing. The silence in the room became unbearable, like it knew something I didn't. At 7:55, I gave in. The TV screen lit up, bathing my small living room in a warm, seductive glow. The set was staged like a soft dream, gold accents, velvet pillows, and dim lighting that made everything seem tender and sympathetic. And there, in the center of it all, was Radley. She sat elegantly on a cream-colored couch, legs crossed just right, her blonde hair falling in loose waves like a halo. She wore muted blue, the color of sorrow, but her eyes glittered with control. She held a tissue between her fingers, untouched but present. Prop or shield, I couldn't tell. The chyron beneath her read, the grieving daughter carrying the family legacy. My jaw clenched. The host, a middle-aged man with practiced warmth, leaned forward. Radley, your story has touched so many. You stayed by your father's side in his final days. You're stepping into his shoes in the community. But tell us, how has this journey affected your relationship with your sister? Twyla, is it? There was the pause, just long enough to imply pain, just long enough to draw sympathy. Then she began. Radley's voice trembled ever so slightly. Twyla. Well, she's always been a little distant. We all have different ways of grieving, of course. But Twyla, she shut everyone out. We tried to include her, to bring her back into the fold, but she made choices. She pressed the tissue lightly to her cheek, even though not a single tear had fallen. I pray for her every night, she continued. Wherever she is, I hope she's healing. I really do. A soft, sad smile. A beat. Then, I believe we all carry scars. I just choose to carry mine with purpose. The audience murmured. Some clapped. Others nodded solemnly. One woman in the front row wiped her eyes. My phone began buzzing. Notifications rolled in like a rising tide. Just saw Radley on TV. She's incredible. You're lucky to have a sister like her. So inspiring. What a story. I muted the phone and sat in the dark, fingers curled around my mug so tightly I could feel the ceramic digging into my palm. On that screen, Radley was rewriting history. She was painting herself as the saint, and me, the troubled ghost in the attic no one talks about. The next morning at the grocery store, I was picking apples when Mr. Burnham, a retiree I vaguely remembered from church, stopped beside me. Twyla, he said gently, we saw your sister last night. She's remarkable. It must be hard for you. I hope you're finding peace, too. I forced a smile. Thanks, I murmured, retreating toward the dairy aisle. But the whispers followed me. Through the shelves, past the cash registers, out into the cold. People didn't ask for my side. They didn't need to. Radley had already written it for them. I had become a character in her narrative, a frail, forgotten echo. But I didn't cry. When I got home, I watched the segment again. This time, I didn't sit as a sister. I sat as a witness. I took out a notebook and started writing. I marked every inconsistency, every polished lie, every date that didn't match. I caught her subtle digs, her manipulations masked as concern. It wasn't rage fueling me, it was clarity. Later that night, Clint called. Watched it, he said. No hello, just those 2 words. She's not even hiding it anymore, I replied. She doesn't have to. She thinks you won't fight back. But she's making mistakes, Twy. Big ones. Lies on camera don't go away. They pile up. Just let her talk. She's digging her own grave. I leaned back in my chair, breathing easier. She thinks I'm too weak. Good. Let her. After we hung up, I sat in silence at the kitchen table. The overhead light buzzed faintly. I stared at the blank page in front of me, then wrote slowly, deliberately. Lies collapse under their own weight. The world will clap for a show. But truth doesn't need applause. It just waits. I closed the journal and looked out the window. Across the city, lights flickered against the black sky like tiny flames that refused to die. I didn't feel powerful. I felt patient. And when her lies grew louder than the truth, I didn't feel fear. I felt ready. The black stretch limo rolled to a slow, deliberate stop in front of the Vanmore estate just as the sun dipped beneath the horizon. Dusk painted the skies in hues of lavender and gold, casting a dreamlike glow over the manicured hedges and the towering marble columns flanking the grand entrance. Lanterns flickered to life along the stone pathway, each one a soft beacon leading guests toward the night's main event. I stepped out, heels clicking against the cold marble steps. The scent of fresh orchids met me at the door, mingling with the faintest trace of aged wood and expensive cologne. Radley's world, curated to perfection. This night was hers, her crown, her ceremony, her coronation of legacy. I was only here to witness it, even if my name was never supposed to cross anyone's lips. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with extravagance. Crystal chandeliers glowed like constellations above swirls of tulle and velvet. Laughter echoed like distant chimes, and camera flashes erupted along the walls as if stars were colliding around the edges of this galaxy she ruled. Champagne flowed, music played softly from a string quartet in the corner, and the scent of wealth was thick in the air. At the front of the ballroom, Radley stood poised on a raised dais, her figure wrapped in ivory silk that clung like it had been poured over her. Her diamonds sparkled under the lights, and her smile was the picture of poised benevolence. The banner overhead read, "A Legacy of Love." And beneath it, Radley basked in the glow of her curated truth. I kept to the shadows, sliding into a chair at the back of the room. I didn't want recognition. I didn't even want revenge. Not exactly. I just wanted the truth, for once, to be louder than the lies. She took the mic with the ease of someone born into power. Her voice, smooth, practiced, compelling, filled the room. "My father entrusted me with his vision," she said, gesturing gracefully. "And in my sister Twyla, I saw someone who walked away. She chose distance. I loved her anyway." The crowd chuckled politely. The applause came next. That same applause once trailed behind me like a scornful echo when I was pushed to the edges of this family. Now it wrapped around Radley like a robe of approval. She clicked a remote in her hand, and the screen behind her came to life with a slideshow. One image after another. Family gatherings, charity galas, beachside smiles, holiday parties. Photos of a perfect daughter, a perfect family. My father's face showed up again and again, always beside Radley, never beside me. My name, unspoken, erased. I gripped the edge of my chair, trying to breathe past the tightness in my chest. Then, something happened. The screen flickered. Radley paused, tapping the remote again. The screen twitched, scrambled. The crowd murmured. And then, slowly, a video began. My father's face appeared, not in a posed, polished photo, but in raw video. His voice echoed through the ballroom like a ghost waking from slumber. "If you're hearing this, the truth must finally be known." Gasps rippled through the room. The screen sharpened. My father sat in his study, eyes serious, expression grave. "Radley and Marlowe manipulated my will," he said. "They distorted my wishes for their own ambition. Twyla, my youngest, was the one who stayed when others left. She was the one who stood by me." There were audible gasps. Guests turned to each other, wide-eyed. Phones came out. Cameras rolled. Radley stood frozen, her lips parted but no sound coming out. Marlowe, in a flash of panic, lunged toward the AV team. "Cut the feed!" she barked. "Shut it off now!" But it was too late. My father's voice continued, calm and unwavering. "Do not erase her again. Let the truth live longer than my silence." A stillness fell over the room, a moment suspended in glass. Meredith, seated near the front, rose unsteadily. Her face was pale, eyes wide with conflict. "You don't understand," she said, voice trembling. "Radley was trying to protect the family." But even she didn't sound convinced anymore. Then came Clint. He stepped into the light, clean-shaven, in a dark suit, holding the manila folder I had once hidden in a drawer behind a fake wall panel. He walked past the stunned guests, the cameras, the scandal, and placed the folder in my hands. No words, just a nod. Radley watched, her color draining like spilled paint. I stood. My hands trembled, but my voice found me. "No more lies," I said. "Not from you, not from anyone." People turned toward me. The name no one had dared speak all night was now echoing off crystal and glass. "Twyla?" someone whispered. Radley took a breath, but it caught halfway through. Her composure collapsed, and she sank back into her chair. Her gaze dropped to the floor as the weight of decades settled onto her shoulders. Marlowe blurted, "This is a performance. You're all being manipulated." No one moved. No one listened. Clint held up a copy of the will, the forensic evidence, and the signed affidavits. The truth, at last, had become a matter of record. Meredith, face streaked with silent tears, looked at me with something between sorrow and apology. And just like that, the crown Radley had spent her life building crumbled. Silently, but completely. Not with fire, not with fury, but with the undeniable force of truth. The chandeliers still glowed, the string quartet still played, but the illusion had shattered. The ballroom, once her stage, now felt like a courtroom. The Vanmore mansion, once her throne, had become the graveyard of her lies. The night Radley's empire cracked wasn't loud. It was strangely quiet, like the world had taken a deep breath and was holding it in suspense. The air outside the Carrington mansion was sharp, electrified by truth finally spoken aloud. Inside, the once grand ballroom had fallen into stunned silence. Only the distant hum of voices, rapid-fire camera clicks, and reporters calling out Radley's name echoed behind me as I stepped into the long, darkened corridor. With each step, the glitter and gold of the evening receded. I walked past tall portraits of ancestors who'd stared blankly down from the walls for decades. For the first time, I saw them not as reminders of what I didn't have, but of everything I didn't need. I wasn't part of that illusion anymore. I was something different, something freer. Over the next few days, the story exploded in the media like fireworks on the 4th of July. Every major outlet devoured it. Headlines flared. Carrington heiress accused of fraud. Secret will unveiled. Sibling betrayal exposed. Empire built on lies? The family yacht, once a symbol of wealth and escape, was seized by federal agents. The mansion's ownership became tangled in endless litigation. Radley disappeared from the spotlight as quickly as she'd basked in it. Marlowe, her ever-loyal partner in schemes, faced an onslaught of subpoenas. Meredith, once loud and dismissive, retreated into silence, ignoring calls, neighbors, and reality. And me? I returned to my apartment. Small, quiet, but mine. One evening, as the city lights blinked through the blinds, Clint arrived. He looked tired but satisfied, as if justice had finally found a foothold. He placed a manila folder on my kitchen table. "Your father wasn't as blind as you thought," he said. "He created a trust, hidden, protected, meant only for you, if things ever went wrong." I stared at the folder, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Inside were years of untouched funds, held quietly in reserve. Not flashy, not extravagant, but thoughtful, intentional. I could fight for more, demand my share of the estate, the house, the prestige. But I realized I didn't want any of it. I didn't want what could be taken. That Saturday, beneath the creaky rafters of a modest room above a Detroit public school auditorium, I took the podium. Around me sat local teachers, community organizers, curious parents. I held up the envelope bearing my father's scrawled signature, not for pity, not for revenge, but as proof that something beautiful could rise from something broken. "I'm proud to announce," I said, steady but emotional, "the founding of the Carrington Scholars Fund, dedicated to supporting underprivileged students in Detroit with big dreams and limited means." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone from the back called out, "You're not keeping the house?" I smiled. They clung to bricks and boats. I chose minds and futures. The room broke into applause. Not the kind bought with influence or reputation, but the kind that echoed with sincerity. Cameras captured the moment, but this time, they weren't aimed at scandal. They captured hope. Later, I walked back into my classroom, the place where my real identity had taken root. The desks were still slightly crooked. The ceiling lights still flickered. But everything felt alive. My students shuffled in, some groggy, some chatting about weekend plans. One, a shy girl in the front row, handed me a folded card. "Miss Carrington," she said softly, "thank you for seeing something in me." Inside, in shaky handwriting, "You believed in me when no one else did." I clutched the card to my chest, my throat tightening. This was my legacy. Not a title on a deed, not a portrait on a wall, but change, planted in the minds of those who needed it most. That night, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was instantly familiar, elegant, precise. Meredith. I held the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside, on a single sheet of thick cream paper, she'd written, "Your father would be proud. I should have seen it sooner." No apology, but acknowledgement, and in its own way, that meant more than 1,000 sorries. The next morning, the sky was clear, crisp. I drove to the cemetery with a single thing in my pocket, the one-way ticket my father had left me. The insult, the curse, the push I hadn't understood at the time. Now I did. The graveyard was quiet, rows of headstones lined up like silent witnesses. I found his. Roland Carrington. I knelt, pulling the worn ticket from my coat pocket. I held it for a moment, then gently placed it at the base of the stone. "I made it, Dad," I whispered. "Not to where you thought, but to who I was meant to be." I stood and walked away. Not out of anger, not to make a scene. Just forward, no applause. No triumph, only the quiet, steady steps of someone who no longer seeks permission to exist. Because in the end, the smallest inheritance turned out to be the greatest gift, the freedom to choose my own legacy. Sometimes, the biggest lessons come not from what we inherit, but from what we choose to walk away from. Twyla didn't fight for bricks or boats. She built something far more lasting: dignity, purpose, and truth. What would you have done in her shoes? Have you ever felt erased by your own family's choices? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. More real, raw, and powerful family stories are coming your way.